Okay, I wanted to take just a few minutes to cover a few slides that might be helpful, especially if there was anything from the first few chapters that you felt like you weren't fully taking away, all of the main ideas, because we didn't have it, all the time in class to look at this. I have a few slides that were just discussion questions that we didn't get to since we spent most of our time on the Miro board and then looking at definitions of courage. But sometimes it can help us to just process through helpful open-ended questions that maybe allow you to think even deeper about what you've read. So I'll just share those with you, and that might help you as well. So the first question I had put together: how do you feel about Alvarez's choice to write from multiple perspectives? What are the strengths and weaknesses to this approach? So you notice in the first four chapters, there's a different perspective in each of them. One is Dede, then Minerva, Maria Teresa, and finally Patria. And we do learn a little bit more about some of the others sisters sprinkled in, right? But it has that unique perspective, which can be maybe a little confusing at times, switching back and forth. But what do you see as some of the strengths and weaknesses? Next, why might have Alvarez chosen to share Maria Teresa's view in epistolary form, which is like as a letter or a diary? What effect might that create for you? In fact, there are later chapters, at least one other later chapter, in which we will see more diary entries, I think two, from Maria Teresa. And then next, what are the differences in each sister's voice? Does Alvarez succeed in making the voices or characters distinct? So what do you see as kind of the differences between the sisters? Now, it might be a little bit early to tell, too early to tell, since we're just being introduced to these sisters. But what kind of unique personalities, characteristics, and voices do these sisters begin to develop or demonstrate? What are some of the key cultural differences you notice between the lives of the Mirabal sisters and your own culture? So obviously this takes place in the Dominican Republic. So what do you notice as some differences? There's also a time difference, right? Because this moves back and forth between the mid 20th century to 1994. And so there might be some differences just in like technology or infrastructure just because of the time. But what other cultural differences do you notice? And I'm going to kind of share an example of that in a moment. What are some of the key plot events? Obviously, just thinking through what actually took place, and any other interesting insights that you've noticed as you've gone along. Now, these are more for yourself as I'm sharing them with you in video form. We didn't get a chance to discuss in class, but there are things to kind of continue considering. Now, here are a few key highlights that I did want to share with you that as you continue on with your reading, I think these are helpful to kind of keep in mind. So first of all, just a reminder, time-wise, that this novel will move back and forth between the present. So the present for the novel is 1994. In fact, the version, the copy that I linked for the class is the 25th anniversary edition. Okay, so it's old, not very old, but it's been around for a little while. And in this case, the present is 1994. But then it goes back into the time of the Mirabal sisters, who the very first date in the first chapter is 1943, all the way up to November 25th, 1960, when three of the sisters were killed. And so kind of keep that in mind, because sometimes that's difficult to remember. This is actually Dede in the future talking to the Gringa Dominicana, as she says, the Dominican Gringa. And sometimes this is back in the past. Most of it is back in the past, recounting the lives of these sisters. So chapter 1 opens up in the present, right? And so we see some of the cultural differences, even though this interviewer is actually Dominican. The book says that she left at an early age to go to the United States, and that her Spanish isn't that great. And so it shows some differences of a Dominican who's lived there all her life versus a Dominican ethnically, but maybe culturally is more adapted to the United States. And in some ways, this might even reflect the author, Julia Alvarez, because that was part of her story. She was born in the Dominican Republic, Republic, had to flee with her family because of the reign of Trujillo, and then later came back. So she kind of struggles with some of that dual identity as well. Speaking of identity, one of the key takeaways here that we're going to see throughout the book is the identity of Dede, who is a survivor. She has a new life, and she's won awards to go on these vacations and everything. And so on the one hand, she just seems like a normal person, but then she gets these visitors to the museum for her sisters. She is the surviving sister, so she lived through all of the terror of Trujillo's reign. And so she's the same person, but she's not the same person. In the future, she's divorced from the husband that we're introduced to earlier on in these early chapters, Jaimito. So there's kind of this struggle with identity. Other key characters are introduced, family members, her other sister, Trujillo. We see those in chapter 1, and sort of a foreshadowing, which towards the end, at the very end of the chapter, her father only states the future of Dede and not her other sisters. So we're already seeing sort of this separation between, this kind of this veil between Dede and her sisters, and we'll see that more and more throughout. Chapter 2, we see Minerva's characterization. She's independent. She feels stifled by being at home. She wants to go away to school. Later, she wants to go to the capital for university. She's very, very much an activist, stands up for the rights of others, justice for Cenita, which is also kind of a foreshadowing. The way she stands up for her classmate and friend is maybe foreshadowing of the kind of things that she will be involved in later on. And she is very much the leader of these sisters. Coming of age, we see that as not just with Minerva, but with her sisters as well. And so we also kind of have this early part of the book which highlights these sisters just growing up. And so we see sort of this normality of just trying to be a teenage girl growing up in the Dominican Republic, but then also, under the oppressive rule of this dictator, and sort of evolving into who they would someday become as adults, right? And so that's kind of an aspect of some of these early chapters as well. And then we're already introduced to some of Trujillo's cruelties towards Cenita's family, and so we have this character who has gone through these difficult things, but it's hearsay, right? And so we can even think of some of the difficulties at times today in our news cycles of, we have one news outlet that's reporting this, we have another news outlet that's reporting this, we have people whose individual stories are maybe a little bit different. Like, who do we believe? And so there's also that same kind of fear of like, what's the news that's true at this time? And then it becomes more and more apparent just how terrible and how mean Trujillo really is, right? We also see a pattern that will play out throughout the rest of the novel, and what we know historically about Rafael Trujillo is that he preyed on young women. And so we see Lina, who's treated all nice and wonderful, but then really just kind of becomes this puppet mistress to Trujillo, just like other women are as well. And there's kind of that fear, especially as a woman, of, will they be preyed upon by Trujillo and others? And so we see kind of culturally this kind of dominant, controlling society at times, what is allowed among men, but is being combated and fought against from other open-minded men and from women as well. And then also Minerva's performance indicates dangers of crossing Trujillo. At the end of chapter 2, she performs with her classmate, and so in order to kind of placate Trujillo because of some of what happened, she has to start shouting "Viva Trujillo! Viva Trujillo! Viva Trujillo!" in order to kind of falsely show her patriotism and her loyalty to Trujillo. And so we see some of that fear of what needs to be done in order to stay out of danger. And then lastly, chapters 3 and 4, we also see Maria Teresa, who is somebody who might represent sort of this idea of losing one's innocence, moving from childhood into being an adult. Very early on in the chapter, she's just this young girl, and she writes in her diary about kind of young girl things, right? But then especially in her relationship with Minerva, she discovers or is made aware of some of the atrocities that are already happening in her country and under Trujillo's reign, and so she kind of represents maybe this evolution of becoming aware of the realities of life and moving out of childhood, right? Also, Patria represents the more traditional religious Dominican. She's a very devout Catholic. She marries young. She begins having children. But I think one of the things that Alvarez does really well is that she still portrays Patria as a complex character, right? That's the best literature does that. No one person is 100% good or 100% bad, but they might in general be good, but have done bad things, or they might in general be bad, but occasionally will do something good. And we'll see that in some of these characters. Patria isn't 100% religious because she experiences a loss of faith towards the end of this early reading in chapter 4, I believe it is. We see hints of her faith coming back, but it's changed. And she goes to this on this pilgrimage, and she's asking the Virgencita, where is she? And she hears this response saying that I'm here all around you, among the people, right? And so there's this strong connection between the importance of the people, the common people, against dictatorial regimes, and the need to fight for the people, and kind of this statement that God is among the people, the common people, not among the powerful, controlling, manipulative elite. Right. And so those are a few ideas, maybe many more ideas than what you were looking for, but hopefully fill in some of the context of what we've read so far and things that we want to keep in mind as we go forward in our reading.